All right, welcome back. So here we're gonna kick off the only fire talk of tonight from Boopity Beep on how to fail. And so with that, I'm gonna pass it over to her.
Sounds good. Thank you, Justin. I just wanted to say off the bat, I appreciate being able to participate in this community virtually. I live down in the DC, Maryland, Virginia area, specifically Maryland. So given that I'm not in Pittsburgh, I do appreciate being able to hang out with some cool folks that are from that city. So to get things kicked off on my talk, this is going to be not specifically a technical talk in the cyber realm, but it definitely has applications to that world. So how to fail, a brief guide to maintaining forward motion when it's all gone wrong. So as cybersecurity professionals, specifically focused in the offensive realm, a lot of what we tend to do on a day to day is focus on the failures of others. And our success is derived from other people failing. And for whatever reason, we're perfectly fine communicating with others when they fail. But, and at least this is for me, it was kind of a drastic undertaking to go through the emotions of when I felt I had a personal failure and kind of the shame and helplessness associated with that and what it meant to not succeed. So, failure and how to fail is a very broad topic. There's lots of self help books and all of that out there. And I'm not going to profess to be an expert on how to fail. This fire talk was just meant to share a specific story of what I deem to be a personal failure, just to kind of provide some of the lessons learned so maybe anyone out there could apply them to situations in their life that they may face. So to get into my story, I'm going to set the stage. This was in the before times. The year was 2019. I was actually in the city of Pittsburgh for a conference, the Women of Cybersecurity conference, and I was presenting a 1 hour workshop. There was over 100 folks that were signed up to come to this workshop. I had a team of folks that I was presenting with. There was, months of work that had gone into submitting the talk, getting ready, procuring some technology, writing the guide that folks would be going through, and then testing everything out to make sure that it was succinct and we could get it done in the allotted time that we had, and that everybody would have a good takeaway. And I'd also planned in some contingencies as well. So if folks didn't have the prerequisites, they could at least participate in the first half of the workshop. They just need a laptop and the internet, and then they could do, if they had some of the more technical components and requirements, they could finish off in the second half. So after all this preparation and everything to get going, you know, figure this is going to be great. I'm going to be able to teach all these women um, something that I've worked hard to gain knowledge in. And the the workshop starts off good, full room. There's a line out the door. We have a lot of folks that are interested in participating, and it quickly goes downhill from there. Um, we we start off, do our introductions. I think there was 5 or 6 of us on the team that were presenting. I was kind of uh, the leader of the effort, and slowly, as we're going the first 5-10 minutes, we get to the first exercise, and people kind of just start pouring out the door, and I'm wondering like what's going on. Is this not thinking it, or did we say something that was wrong? Like, why are people just like getting up and leaving? And I, I still don't know, kind of to this day. I didn't get a lot of good feedback from that, and still kind of overanalyze what happened there a lot. And I mean that this is almost 2 years later after that conference happened. So I'm going to talk through kind of when things went downhill and when I started to feel like the talk was becoming a failure, what I did to make sure that we got to the end and we accomplished at the very least like what we set out to do to begin with. So the first thing, as people are starting to pour out the door, I have that initial reaction of, oh goodness, something's going wrong. What did we do? How can I fix this? You immediately start to get into a defensive mode, and I'm almost thinking more about what's going wrong instead of about what I'm trying to deliver and talk about next. Um, so my voice starts to get anxious. I start to get, a little bit apprehensive. And when that happens, I know I've got 4 points on the slide that I want to touch on here. The first thing I did was like, okay, I just need to reset. Um, took a took a quick breath, um, took a drink. I think it was at a point where I was just like, okay, let's do a 5-minute break. Um, there was always going to be some sort of moment. It doesn't have to be a long moment, but when you start to realize you have those feelings of anxiety, like, oh, something's going wrong, like I don't like what's happening, even if it's, nobody else notices that something's going wrong, but you start to feel that way, don't let that initial feeling continue to fuel your reaction of what's going to happen next. Just take a moment. It doesn't have to be like super noticeable. Taking a drink or a 5-minute break, or even like asking the audience the question if you are in a conference type of situation, and then wait for a response. It might be an awkward silence, but sometimes that can be helpful to just reset your tone. And then, after you take that moment of refresh and figure out, how am I going to respond then to the situation instead of reacting? So reactions can tend to be emotionally fueled and like, I'm just going to get through this. It's going to be a fight or flight, and you're going to figure it out and keep going. Taking the moment and then figuring out how to respond is something that I've been focusing on a lot this year, especially I think having a toddler. It's a big lesson to learn. Sometimes you just have to take a moment, even with them, figure out, okay, how am I going to respond to what they just did instead of having an emotionally fueled reaction. So that's my first point is figuring out how to breathe and then move on from there. And that goes into the next point of adapt. So adapt to the situation in which you now find yourself. What just quickly refocus on what was the main objective of why you're there. So for us in that talk, we were there to provide, some insight into our workshop was on getting initial access during a pen test. And the first half of it was all just, going through and basically doing some information gathering and recon on how to craft a phishing email. And so, with that, and then, just the main goal of it was to teach other women in our field and get them inspired. And, everyone might not be super thrilled about what initial access in a pen test looked like. Um, Thinking back on it, it might have been that, it wasn't as enticing as people thought it would be. Uh, Doing information gathering to write phishing emails is not always the most fun. It's not just like you're dropping shells right out of the bat. There's some interesting work that goes into it. So I was like, well, maybe it just wasn't as exciting. But there were people that stayed. There were a lot of good folks that did stay in the room and listen to the talk all the way through. And so understanding that our main objective was just to impart our wisdom and inspire other people, we were still on the path to do that. That wasn't a total failure. A lot of what we started to feel like was a failure was that it didn't meet our expectations. And, you know, adapting our own expectations to realize, okay, we're not going to teach 100 women and inspire 100 women. It's okay if it's only like 5. And then, from some of the technical difficulties and other things we experienced later in the talk, we just continued to adapt. So a lot of um, folks ended up not meeting the prerequisites, and we realized, okay, that's fine. We're just going to turn this more so into a storytelling session. And there are a lot of folks that still stayed engaged when we shifted a little bit. And it's okay to do that. It's okay to say, okay, this has gotten off the rails. Um, People kind of are losing focus here. So let's figure out a way that we can still meet our objective and adjust quickly. And I think we did that. And despite like a lot of the hangups, we were successful in adapting. And even if it's a small adjustment, um, just figuring out how to quickly adapt really helped. And with adapting, recovery is really important. Um, and I realized that kind of quickly. So recovery to me was just like the initial shaking it off. It's like, okay, there's the emotion of folks walking out the door and feeling like as every person walks out the door, like I'm failing them. And you just have to let that go. It's like, okay, they're gonna leave. They're not interested in what I'm saying. That has no if that doesn't define my worth with them leaving the door. I could just not be interesting to them, and that's fine. And you have to go back to the mental space of when you started, because the more you let it sink in, even after like adapting and figuring out a new path, if you don't get back to that mental space of when you were excited to start the talk, uh, that folks are going to realize that you've lost some of your enthusiasm and liveliness. And at the least, like that's a very contagious thing, especially if you're looking to be an inspiration or a motivator for other people to join the field. Because for them, like they could have no idea that you're actively failing at something. They could be thinking the entire time that things are interesting, even if it's only 5 people that think that you're interesting. And so just remaining enthusiastic throughout is definitely a good motivator. And then forgiveness is going to be my final point. And this happened this can happen in the action of like when you're actively failing. So I've had the hardest time, and I didn't do this. I kind of at the talk I stayed in probably just barely that recover point where I was still at the end of the talk, getting back to the point that I was like at the beginning. And at the end of our our workshop talk, I basically just wanted to go hide back in my hotel room because I was like, that was awful. I never want to do that again. Um, and I think because I didn't get to the point at the end of like initially forgiving myself, that I missed a lot of what could have happened next. Because there were some women that came up to me at the end of the talk, and they wanted to ask me questions and talk, and I wasn't as engaging as I knew I could have been because I was upset at the way things had just gone. And so I think the forgiveness is a two-part, like the act of forgiving yourself right away and saying, okay, I'm going to analyze and probably overanalyze the situation later. Just be in the moment now and, work through whatever needs to be worked through later to make it better for the future. And then also, don't totally shut off to opportunity to celebrate, you know, and say, okay, we did that. It wasn't the best that it could have been, but we're still going to celebrate the fact that we got here and we did this. And it was still pretty cool that we got to have this opportunity. And forgiveness is kind of the thing that took me probably close to a year to get through, because I was like, that was just awful. I turned to a lot of generalizations where I'm like, I'm not good enough to do this. Well, if people were walking out the door, then I probably should not be giving workshop talks at conferences. And I wanted to shut off and disengage from the community. And I was just overly critical of myself, um, because I defined a lot of my value with every person that walked out the door. And I also the key hang up I think with forgiveness too was I placed a lot of pride in my preparation for the talk and workshop. So I made assumptions that everything wasn't going to be perfect. I had several contingency plans in place, and kind of still, I felt like all of them did not equate to the scenario that played out. And because I didn't think of the scenario that played out, I was upset at myself for not thinking about that. And I don't think that it would have been right to continue on and figure out all the what if scenarios. You can what if all day. Um, but at the end, it's still important to know that you just got to keep moving forward. Everyone is going to have times that they fail, and finding that forward motion after a failure can be really difficult. You're going to analyze what happened, get your lessons learned, think of how you adjust for next time, and focus on the things that are in your control. So I couldn't control keeping people in that room. Would have been really awkward if I tried. Um, but focus on, what are the things that I could set up for next time that would keep people more engaged, despite how they walked in the room, if they had a laptop, if they didn't have a laptop, um, and all those other factors. And then just never give up on learning. So there are a lot of things that I learned out of that workshop on how I might give a technical workshop in the future. And I think that that was really important. And then, from those lessons that I learned, finding friends and people that I trust to give candid feedback for when I try to pursue something like that again in the future. Because the last thing you want to do is not fully forgive yourself and kind of start to pursue a similar path again in the future and have such a heavy reliance on, okay, well, if I fail this time, then I'm definitely never doing this again, or just have a over heightened sense of emotion and anxiety attached to the time when you're going to retry after a failure. Just don't do that, because that's just as harming to the whole process. And then I would say, just from all of that, just finding people, finding a community, because life is more fun with friends, and having people that you feel safe to fail with. And I think that is my story. That is my fire talk. Thank you for coming.
All right, thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions? While we wait for a minute to see if anyone has any questions, I just want to say thank you for sharing that with us all. And everyone has stories of failure, and they're not easy to talk about, but one of the things that I love is I find you learn a whole lot more through failing than you do through succeeding. I've had so many failures, but it's like anytime I succeed, I'm like, well, yeah, the thing I expected worked. When you fail, you get to find out new things like, oh, I need to think about this thing in a completely different way.
Yeah, definitely. And it's not even always like, oh, my shellcode failed to load. It's like, oh, emotions are hard.
Yeah, people are difficult. It's
Yeah.
definitely you can never plan for every contingency when you're dealing with human beings. There's no way to ever cover everything. All right, not seeing any questions, just seeing people saying great job and thank you very much. Oh, someone's typing. I'll give them a chance to finish typing. So did you enjoy Pittsburgh while you were up here?
I did, yeah. I actually lived in Pittsburgh for a time growing up, from like age 2 to age 10. So I'm not familiar with the city. And also my brother-in-law has a pizza shop. So if anyone is ever out in Coriopolis, make sure you hit up Zuko's Pizza.
All right. Free shout out for Zuko's Pizza in Coriopolis.
Yep.
So Mike on Discord just said last week he was in a place where he would have loved to see this talk. So it's so important to learn how to fail and pick yourself back up, and then smiley face emoji.
smiley face emoji back.
All right, and with that, don't see any other questions. So thank you very much for giving this talk. Thank you everyone who joined us, and have a good night all.